Hello, YouTube. I'm 2 minutes late because I was having trouble getting YouTube to say you're live. It was saying going live, and I had a buffering thing for the last minute and a half. But it says I'm live now, which I suppose is good. But I can't promise I won't have glitches because apparently I had connectivity issues even getting to this point. So if I have glitches, please let me know. Say hello if you're here watching live. If you're watching later, then I will do my best to not glitch. If I had that kind of power, I can't promise I would use it only for good. Yeah, so anyway, it is Tuesday, March 23rd, and this is our Tuesday breakdown, and I'm Jeff, and I will be your cruise director for the next half hour. Sunday recap I want to get to. The sermon that John, our youth pastor candidate, preached. But I should probably start off with the news of what's going on around us here in Longmont. For those of you who are watching from other places around the country or around the world, you may not know, Longmont is about 20 minutes from Boulder. And yesterday, we had a guy walk into a grocery store in Boulder and kill a bunch of people. And so that is fresh on my mind, probably on the minds of people watching. And as a pastor, these are the types of things that I always feel like they merit some sort of comment from me. Whenever there's a tragic situation or major news in the country, I feel the pressure to say something, to make some, this is how we as Christians should respond to this situation. And it does. It comes with the job and it comes with those types of things. But obviously, this isn't about me. This is about all those families. And even though I make a living as a wordsmith, there are certain events there just aren't words for. And here in Colorado, we've seen too many of them. It immediately reminded me when I heard the news yesterday of the theater shooting in Aurora back in 2012, the summer of 2012. And we still lived in Aurora then. And that was just about as close to my front door as this was here in Boulder, maybe even a little closer. And you don't know what to do. The selfishness or the immediate human response is to think, oh, I hope I don't know anyone who is affected by that. And then you realize, well, even if I don't, somebody does, and they have a family. And so you feel that heartbreak for them. You automatically put yourselves in the shoes of the parents of people whose kids may or may not come home that night. And it's just so jarring. But it's been one of the thoughts I have is we studied a couple weeks ago, maybe a month and a half ago, the passage in Luke where Jesus is asked about the tower that fell on all the people, or what Pilate did in doing some horrible, tragic things to people. And they were asking Jesus, what are you going to say about that? What do we do about that? And Jesus is not interested so much in the news of the day and the tragedies of what might have just happened. Not that he doesn't have emotions towards that. We know he wept when his friend died. And obviously, this is the exact type of situation that he died for, that Jesus died for. But the scenarios that happen when these massive tragedies happen, or even if it's not a massive tragedy, maybe it's not 10 people who get shot in a grocery store. Maybe it's your loved one is killed in a car accident, which happened to people I know more than once, even recently. The cry in that moment is, well, if God is sovereign, why didn't he stop it? And that's really the question that they were asking Jesus. And his answer was essentially, it's not a matter of who sinned more or less. Do you think they were worse people than us, than you? Jesus wouldn't have said us, he would have said you. But what's more important is if your name's written in the book of life. And as horrible as what happened yesterday is, and how quickly we are to politicize it, is this another story about gun control? Is this another story about police? Is this another story about race? That's what my Twitter feed was all full of yesterday, was the immediacy of, oh, see this about that and this about that. My takeaway from it is anything can happen to any of us at any time, right? Like, I don't want to sit in judgment on the shooter or on, I mean, it's not my job to decide waiting periods on guns or which guns should be outlawed or which shouldn't. I'm a Second Amendment guy, and I also hate guns as a person. So I don't know. I'm certainly not the authority to speak into that. But I do know that anything can happen to any one of us at any time, or our loved ones. I'm pretty sure human history has borne that out. Whether it's a pandemic, whether it's a semi-truck, whether it's an active shooter, none of us are exempt from tragedy, and none of us are exempt from sudden tragedy, which is why we need Jesus. I think it's why the gospel exists, is if there's nothing better coming, we might as well be nihilists. We might as well be depressed all the time and just hopeless. And even though we grieve, the Bible says we don't grieve as those without hope. The grief is real because tragedy is real. And a sovereign God he has in his sovereignty not created a universe where those things don't exist anymore. But in his sovereignty, he has created a universe and then paid the price to create a future where those things are redeemed, where justice is done. And if your name is written in the book of life, when anything can happen to anyone at any moment, that's not the end of the story. And so I don't really know if that's a pithy statement about what happened yesterday. It certainly doesn't amount to a rallying cry, but I think it is the gospel. And I think that's really the point. So I wanted to start off with that. And just being honest, there's a lot of times where I feel like it is my job to stand up and say something. And then there are other days where it's kind of like, I'd rather let my words be few. Because whatever I say could be really either misconstrued or stupid or wrong or insensitive. Being public with statements right now is a dangerous game. But at the same time, to say nothing would be a failure as a shepherd. So anyway, that's what I'll say about it. I think the sermon from Sunday that John preached, that passage, the prodigal son, Luke 15, is maybe a go-to passage for exactly stuff like this. The gospel is that God's heart is for everyone, for the lost, for the hurting, for the damaged, for the people who do damage. We want retribution. We want things to be correct for us. Like the older brother in that story, we want fairness for our perspective. And for those quick to politicize events like what happened yesterday, that's part of it. We want fairness. That this is fair, that's not fair. How do we make sure that those things never happen again? And those are good questions. Those are good questions. But the gospel and what it tells us about the heart of God is that the whole concept of grace is that he's unfair in our favor. And if he was really fair, none of us would draw another breath for another second. That doesn't mean victimization is good. Like nobody should, there still shouldn't be the loss of human life. That's one of the top 10 that he gave us. Don't do that. That's wrong, and it should be met with justice. But the gospel is a gospel of grace, and it is hope because it tells us God is a God of justice, but he's also a God of mercy. And his heart is to run out to anyone who is running towards him. And right now, whenever there's a tragedy, especially close to home, we have one of two choices, and we feel it every time. We either run to God or we run away from God. But hardly anyone is neutral towards God in a time of crisis. And what the passage tells us in Luke 15 is that God will run to meet you if you make your way towards him. And so I thought John did a great job. For those of you who heard the sermon or watched online, he had this great illustration about the kids at the zoo and what happens if you lose something and you need to find it, and if that's a person. And again, in the context of Luke 15, you have the woman who lost her coin, you have the shepherd who lost the sheep, but here it's a human being that's lost. And the stakes are raised. And I thought John did a good job of pointing out how people would respond if it's a human. An acceptable loss, 1 coin out of 10, maybe. 1 sheep out of 100, maybe. 1 human out of any number of humans, not okay. Not an acceptable loss. You can never have that as your economy. 1 human is never an acceptable loss. And so I think that's where Jesus is coming from, and that's where the gospel is rooted. To God, he created all of humanity. Sin entered the world. Mankind fell. Okay, God, how many is acceptable? How many is an acceptable loss? And you have these parables to show what Jesus is saying. The heart of the Father, the point of the kingdom, the currency of the kingdom is 1 is too many to lose. Now, that doesn't mean we're universalists in our doctrine that God will save everybody, because he set the rules very clearly. No one is deserving of being saved. The offer of salvation is for everybody because of God's great love and mercy for us. We are not consumed, but his mercies are new every morning. Great is his faithfulness. But salvation is by faith. You still have to receive the gift and not run from God or shake your fist at him in defiance or rebellion. And that's the gospel. And that gospel is light in a dark world. In our staff meeting this morning, we were talking about the events, and it was Pastor Ali who just said, this is why what we do is so important. Because without the light of the church, without a place where the gospel is emanating from, these things don't have an answer. There is no way to influence the community away from this type of thing. There just isn't. And the more I thought about what he was saying, the more I, delved into it in my own thoughts as well. The world kingdom and the teaching of our culture is on the presuppositions that we don't mean anything to the universe. We are cosmic accidents that happened through a variety of things that were so random they're essentially mathematically impossible. But there's no thread of meaning unless we create one as a community. And so that's the ethos, that's the perspective, the epistemology of the people in the world today. And if you took the gospel away, if you took the teachings and the presence and the sacrifice and the meaning of Jesus and his gospel out of this world, then what happened yesterday wouldn't be a tragedy. By logic, it shouldn't be a tragedy. The whole concept of survival of the fittest, as horrific as it sounds, but taken to its extreme conclusions, would say survival is what justifies your existence. And those that don't survive, well, there you go. They weren't fit. And death always feels wrong because God is real, because Jesus does exist, because the gospel is true. If there wasn't the love of God and the design he baked into his creation, death is still 100% the correct expectation for humanity. So when it happens, it shouldn't bother us. It shouldn't hurt. Why would it hurt? We're just cosmic accidents anyway. There's no real meaning. It's just what we superimpose on something. So this thing happened and it was bad, but what do we know what bad is? And it hurts and it's tragic, but how do we even know what those words mean? We know what they mean because things do mean things, because we are created in God's image, and because it is wrong to devalue those made in God's image, whether it's racism, whether it's mistreatment of people, whether it's social injustice, or whether it's something as horrific as a terrorist attack on a grocery store. It's wrong, and we know it's wrong. Why do we know it's wrong? Because he has placed eternity in the hearts of men. We know it's wrong because he does exist, and he is good, and he has shown us what good is and how we should treat each other. The whole turn your other cheek thing, that came from Jesus. The whole forgive, that comes from Jesus. When the kingdom of the world is infected and infested with the values of the kingdom of God, they know they're good, whether they can explain it or not. And they are influenced by them, whether they admit it or not. This is the mustard seed that has grown into a tree that the birds of the air can nest in its branches. People are rightly and correctly traumatized by the events of yesterday because God exists. Because if he didn't, we wouldn't be traumatized. It doesn't make it okay, but it makes the gospel that much more important, that much more necessary and rich and light, because it's the only thing that's shining in the darkness. Everything else is just dark. The gospel is the light that says, no. This is right, that's wrong. Thou shalt not murder. It's wrong. Not because civilization has decided that, but because God said that. Okay, now I'm really rambling. Let's get back to Sunday. Thank you, Cynthia, for checking in. Yeah, we have a lot of connection to that, King Supers. So thanks for the comment, Mar. We're going to go back to talking about John and the message. For those of you who were able to see him online or in person on Wednesday teaching to the youth, he did a great passage, John 11, where Jesus said, I'm the resurrection and the life. That's a great passage to go back to, even with the current events that we're dealing with now, as well as what he preached Sunday on the prodigal son. And that I've mentioned in this, I think last week in the Tuesday breakdown, Luke 15, the prodigal son, you could preach that 8 weeks in a row and come at it from different angles and still get the text right. It's just, there's a reason why it's the most famous parable in the whole Bible, is because it's about the prodigal son, it's about the prodigal brother, it's about the father, it's about the gospel to lost people, it's about, hey, don't be a Pharisee to the Christian people in the room. I thought John did a great job of connecting it back to why does he eat with Pharisees? Why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners? All three of the parables in Luke 15 are really about that answer. And so you really can't tell the story of the prodigal son without the older brother. He's clearly the analog character for the Pharisees. But at the same time, the gospel is so rich in the story of the younger son and the heart of God. There's a reason why it's so famous. And I thought John did a great job. And I don't know about anyone else, I'll never forget the image of the penguin in the backpack. That kind of catchy illustration always helps. And I also really appreciated how he talked about how the father tells the older son, it's your duty to celebrate. If you want to make this all about moralism and behavioralism, okay, it is morally your obligation to behave in such a way that you come into the party. I thought that was pretty good. But one of my favorite sayings about the two brothers comes from that book by Tim Keller that I think I showed last week, The Prodigal God, where he says in there, basically you have the two world systems in this parable. You have moralism and you have immorality in the two brothers. They represent those two perspectives on the world. Amoralism or immorality versus moralism or behavioralism. And of course, the parable points out that they're both equally wrong, and they both keep you out of the kingdom of God. However, in the context of the parable, it's easier to overcome immorality and enter the kingdom than it is to overcome moralism and enter the kingdom. And that was Tim Keller's perspective in his book, and I've certainly experienced that as someone with good little boy syndrome, that moralism is just as insidious, if not more so, than lawlessness or immorality. And so I thought John did a good job of making that point in the sermon. He certainly won a lot of us over just in his personality and his winsomeness, easygoing nature. Pastor Matt said today, he's like, well, Jeff, he's certainly a lot like you in his interests and in his personality and even kind of a big picture type leader as opposed to the detail type person. And I said, yeah, that could be fun. In my experience here in my 9 years, I've had great guys on staff, but I haven't had anyone who's really just kind of my personality. So that's actually quite appealing to me right now and kind of fun. I did want to speak to a question we got a couple times. I don't want to point anybody out or make an example of them. But one of the questions that came up is John and Jackie don't have kids of their own. And he's potentially going to be a youth pastor working with kids all the time. And is that a problem? And have they thought about that? And, I understand where that question comes from, but I wanted to speak to it just personally. Number one, that's not really a legal question we can ask in hiring. I don't know for sure, but I think it's illegal to ask that kind of question. But I understand where people would wonder that. If you're going to be taking care of my kid in youth group and you don't have kids of your own, how would you handle that? Just a reminder, Jesus didn't have kids of his own, and he was fine. The Apostle Paul, who wrote the qualifications for elders, that their kids should be believers, wrote that as a single man who didn't have kids of his own. And he wrote it to a guy, Timothy, who was probably a teenager when he got that letter, who didn't have kids of his own that we know of. You have Peter, we know he was married, but we never heard about his kids. So I understand where the concern comes from, but I would take the Apostle Paul as a youth pastor. If he preaches so long that a teenager falls out of a window and dies, he can resurrect him. That happened in the book of Acts. I would take Timothy as a youth pastor. I would take Jesus as a youth pastor. In fact, the two most influential mentors I've had, other than my dad, in my life, were both youth pastors when I was a teenager. They both were married, and neither one had kids at the time. So if that's a concern of yours, I understand, but I don't think that's a legitimate reason why we should be worried about John being a good youth pastor. He's been one for 12 years. And anyway, so I just wanted to speak to that because it did come up a couple times. It even came up in some of the elder discussions. But I really feel like that's a smokescreen. I don't think that is in any way, shape, or form going to limit what he can do with our kids and with our youth. And again, as somebody whose life was really transformed by youth pastors who were married and didn't have kids, I think it's great. I don't see any problem with it. So I wanted to speak to that while I have a camera on me. Let's see what else is going on. Oh, a couple things I have to say for the few of you who are going to watch this. There was some confusion on Sunday in the pre-service announcements about the Q&As coming up. There's a Q&A on Wednesday night. That's tomorrow night at 6:30 with the elders as the last discussion about the bylaw. Since we published the bylaws draft, the third version, we still wanted to have some discussion available for that. That's on Zoom. If you're a member, you got a link to that today in your email. It's not going to be on YouTube. It's going to be on Zoom, the way all the Q&As have been. We will still have some discussion prior to the vote on Sunday, but we really don't want to turn it into a huge discussion meeting because we've had at least 12 chances for people to contribute to this draft of the bylaws. Now, if at the end of it, you still don't like it and you want the whole congregation to hear that you don't like it, there will be a chance to do that. But following Robert's Rules of Order, we need to have discussion after the motion is made and seconded. But anybody can call for the vote at any time, and depending on how much time we have, that vote might be called for. So don't come expecting a 2-hour debate over the bylaws at this point. We've tried to avoid that with all these other chances to contribute and discuss. And then also, we'll have the vote for John on Sunday as well, to extend him the call or not. And we'll have some discussion time for that as well. We want people's feedback on that. If you didn't get a chance to meet him in person because you weren't here this weekend or you didn't know about the meetings, all of his Q&As are available on our YouTube page. So please come ready to vote. Don't come saying, I didn't have a chance to get to know there are opportunities in front of all of us right now. So we'll be doing those 2 votes and then a celebration for Matt and Carla. Oh, also on Sunday, we need to start moving ahead on care pastor. I got an email this week saying we're very sad to see Matt and Carla go. Do we need to have a special meeting to decide on his replacement? And the answer is yes, but we had that meeting in, I think it was November. I want to say November. Maybe it was the January meeting where we talked about we need to hire a youth pastor and then we need to hire a care pastor, who is, I guess, Tim's replacement. But then Matt has been doing the associate job that Tim was doing after Tim retired and Matt came back from Sandstone. So in effect, it is still going to be Matt's replacement. But the idea is a care pastor. The congregation approved us to start down that path. We have a search committee that Rich, our elder chairman, has been working to put together. So we should have names for the congregation to approve on Sunday as well, so that we can get that ball rolling. So it could be that maybe by fall, not only would we have a youth pastor here, but a care pastor here, and that would be great. So we're working towards that, and a job description is in the works for that role. So wanted to make sure you knew that. I feel like I'm forgetting a couple other things. But, by and large, I was ready this week to put on the hat of stuff to vote on. And let's wrestle with that. And these bylaws are hugely important. And a youth pastor call is hugely important and really will set the path and the course for our church moving forward. And I think they are super important. That's why we've been working 6 months on each of those things. But then something like Boulder happens, and you realize, most of the world doesn't care about our church's bylaws. And something like that puts everything in its perspective. What we really need to do is make sure whatever we do in hiring John, approving bylaws, is ultimately about advancing our mission to bring the gospel and the kingdom of God to bear in our world. That's what matters. So let's see. I'm going to have a couple minutes here. I started a little bit late, so I'm going to run a little bit late here as well. Go through some of these comments. Mar, yeah, God qualifies, and it seems like in the messiness of families and teens, John has that experience and still wants to work with youth. Yep, that's true. Is there any chance the Sunday Q&A with John will be posted to the church YouTube channel? It is not up yet. Yeah, we had some confusion about that. That one was kept unlisted. It is there, and if you need a link, let me know. Actually, during the meeting, I had my phone out, and I was looking for the feed of the meeting to answer questions, and I couldn't find it, so I had to text the people in the tech booth, and they're like, oh, it was the link that went out via email the other day. So it does exist, and if you need the link, we can get you the link. Yeah. So I think that's the questions we've got coming up. We do have a Good Friday service, and then Easter on the 4th. That'll be a good time coming up after this week, but 1 week at a time. This Sunday is Palm Sunday. I am going to do the next in our Luke series on Palm Sunday. I'm not going to do a special Palm Sunday message because we'll probably get to that for Palm Sunday 2022 at the pace we're going. Actually, we hope to get through Luke 18 by the end of May. That'll be good. So I'll be back in Luke 16 with the parable of Lazarus and the rich man this Sunday. That's the plan. So it is 1:31. What else can we cover? I think that should just about do it. Definitely everything is under this pall and shadow of what happened in Boulder, but you can continue to pray for us, pray for the church, pray for the leadership. Carissa stopped by this morning and showed off little Soren to the staff. That was awesome. When we were trying to help her with baby names that weren't a help at all, just goofing off with her as she was pregnant, coming into staff meetings, I decided that the baby's name should be Agamemnon. So even though the baby's name is Soren, he will always be a little Aggie to me. So it was good to meet him today. That was awesome. And she'll be back by the end of April, I believe. And then James will be back Mother's Day. So good things are happening, even as we're getting to the finish line of some of this really, really hard work. So Hopefully, I will have next Tuesday's update be a huge celebration because votes passed and we had a big party on Sunday. But we'll also be in Holy Week next week as well. So I will be exhaling April 5th. Until next time, until then, it's a sprint. I almost did my Thursday sign off here. I haven't been doing that on Tuesdays, but I guess it's still true. I'm Jeff and you're you, and God is still God. So we will catch you on Thursday's video or reach out if there's anything you need. Thanks for watching. Thanks for being a part of Grace Church virtually and in person for those of you who are. It means the world to us. So thanks.